Hi, everybody. This is Sheila Kumar Hay of Ecstatic Birth, and I'm really excited for today's conversation to transform birth because we're going to be talking about postpartum. Postpartum is this period which can feel ecstatic. You have your baby, you're creating your family, or it can feel like, oh my God, how am I doing this? How can I handle this? This feels so like traumatic, right? It's this line that we're always talking about, how something can feel amazing or horrible, and like how do you create the conditions to have that joyous feeling, that feeling of ecstasy. So today's guest I'm very excited to have here today, Darcy Sauer. She is a postpartum doula, a lactation counselor. She's also the host of a podcast that I was recently invited to share on called Your Birth, Your Worth. So welcome, Darcy. I'm so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to dive into this topic because it doesn't get talked about a lot.
No, and it's so important. I feel like, especially because the work that I do is so birth focused, I find that a lot of times it's like, okay, how do I do this? How do I do the birth? How do I do? And then, women will have the baby be like, ugh, like now what, and in childbirth worlds, there's a lot of talk about like birth is this marathon. And I actually think like, no, actually birth is the sprint. Motherhood is the marathon. And so that postpartum period is such an important piece. So I was just wondering if you could share a little bit about like the work that you do and the significance of this postpartum period.
Yes. And Sheila, I'm so glad that you started with that because that is the exact reason that I am a postpartum doula and that I've been doing this work for the past 9 years. So when I had my daughter 15 years ago, I thought birth was the big thing that I needed to prepare for. So I read books and, did a lot of research and reading. And then I was like, okay, and then she'll be here and my maternal instincts will kick in and it'll be great. It's going to be great. So fast forward to then she was born and the nurses were like, okay, you guys are all set. You can go home. And I was terrified. And to make a long story short, my postpartum period was not ecstatic. It was much more leaning towards the traumatic side. So that just spurred me to want to help other women not have the experience that I had. But I think it's so common. There's so much pressure, not pressure, but so much focus put on even creating a birth plan. And I always say that's so important, but you also need to create a postpartum plan. And that is what's going to set you up for having an ecstatic experience versus a traumatic experience. And on my website, thedouladarcy.com, you can download my free postpartum plan template that kind of gives you guidelines of, what you need to set up and the kind of things that you need to have a blissful postpartum experience versus a, one that you're kind of struggling through.
I love that you have that resource, and I'll definitely put the link to that in the comments when we're done talking, so anyone that wants to access that can access that resource. I love how you said that, it came from your own traumatic experience that you wanted to support women in this way, and I find that that's often the case for me too. Having had a very traumatic birthing experience and having to figure out, okay, how can we do this differently? That's, what prompted me, and I find that that's often the case. It's like those moments of contraction that we have in our lives, those tough moments are the inspiration for us to do the work that we're meant to be doing.
Yes, it's so true. And I meet so many people, and I have, actually, since we started the podcast, I get so many messages from moms that say, this is what happened to me. I resonated with your story, and how do I start helping women, So I think that is such a common experience that women want to help other women based on what they went through. And I think also the number one thing to do to create your own postpartum experience that is ecstatic is managing expectations. I think for me personally, and I see this all the time with clients, you think, okay, the birth is going to be this marathon. It's going to be hard. It's going to be painful. I'm going to get ready for it. But then you have the baby and you're like, okay, and then everything will be great. It's like, that's where the movie always ends, with the couple snuggling their new baby. And then it's like fade to black. Yeah. So whenever I talk about it, it sounds kind of ridiculous, but I thought that. I was like, all right, the baby will come and then we'll feed it and we'll just be so happy. And I think one of the things I always suggest to women is find a friend or a family member that has had a baby and talk to them about the realities of what it's like in those first few weeks. And then I'm laughing because I was just talking with a couple and I was like, wow, you guys are doing so great. And she said, well, we set our expectations really low. She's like, my goal is every day is just keep the baby alive and then have some food. And she's like, and I'm killing it. I'm doing great. So I always say if you have realistic expectations, then it's much easier to enjoy your postpartum experience. But getting those realistic expectations can be hard when we have people in our life that only talk about the wonderful parts about having a baby, or, and now social media, like all you're seeing is Hollywood stars that have lost all the baby weight and are blissfully happy posing with their babies, and, Meghan Markle and all these, blissful images. And it's getting better. I think people are starting to talk more about the realities, but I think, there's definitely more of a shift that needs to happen to help women prepare for the reality of having a baby in your house.
Yeah. One of the things that you're making me think of in what you're saying is, in preparing for birth, we talk a lot about like creating the conditions to succeed, right? And that's what you're really talking about, like creating the conditions to have the experience you want to have. So like first to hold that vision of how do you want your postpartum period to look? And I think for a lot of, new moms, new families, it's about like that presence. So I love that, this woman you were talking to said, yeah, I'm eating and I'm, spending time with my baby and I'm killing it, because that is a lot of what the postpartum period is about, is that like connection with your baby and just being really present. And I think in a culture where we're always thinking about like, what's next, what should I be doing?
Right.
Staying in the beingness can sometimes be challenging. But I find that in birth, in life, in, postpartum, anything, it's like that beingness, that presence, like being really present in that feeling space of what's going on is what opens you up to like the deliciousness that's available to you.
Absolutely. And it's all about also setting up boundaries in postpartum. Actually, the same in birth. Like really, 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 really think about who you want in your house with you in those first few days and first few weeks. And it's got to be people that you don't feel like you need to be entertaining, that aren't going to be judging you. It has to be only people that are really, truly going to be non-judgmentally supporting you, helping you, loving on you, and taking care of you. And that's what creates that container for success, like you said. So, I think, and I always say that every visitor that you have in the first few days and weeks is a missed nap. So that person has to be worth missing the nap, or you have to be able to say, thanks for coming. I'm going upstairs to sleep while you hold the baby. Yeah. Yeah. Or thanks for coming. Do you mind taking out the trash?
Well, that's the thing is support really does give you the ability to be present, right? Whether it's with your baby or your body and your own needs. And I think we live in a culture that really looks upon, like people asking for support as a sign of weakness. Whereas, in birth, in postpartum, like support is what allows you to do the things that are really important, especially when you have the kind of support like you're describing. There are people that can hold that vision for you. And I'm willing to bet all those celebrities you mentioned earlier, they've got a ton of support behind the scenes.
Right. They're not showing all the help, paid help in the background. I always like to compare it to your honeymoon. So, your wedding is a big day in your life, and after that you celebrate with a honeymoon. Giving birth is a huge day in your life, and afterwards, I know other people call a trip before the baby a babymoon, but I call that after the initial postpartum period a babymoon. And it's because it's very similar. It's a time to just connect with your partner and your new baby. You should spend a lot of time naked doing skin to skin. And you should have those boundaries. Like, in our society, in our culture, we don't expect to go on a honeymoon with a couple, and we're not badgering them like, can we come over? Can we come hang out? Why aren't you sending us pictures every 10 minutes? It's like, oh, they're on their honeymoon. Let's leave them alone. Like, it needs to be the same with the babies. When your baby's here, like, okay, they need to be in their little postpartum bubble. Let's just leave them alone, and let's drop some food off on their porch or a 6-pack of paper towels. Like, let's support them without kind of being intrusive. And I call it like the oxytocin bubble. I've been in, as a postpartum doula, I've been to homes where, like, you come in the door, you can like feel the oxytocin in the air. And that happens like when people have created a little bubble, and it's just mom and partner and baby and maybe grandma or me. And, and they're just skin to skin. They're bonding, they're loving, they're focusing, like you said, only on bonding with the baby, eating, and napping when they can. And then it creates this little bubble of love and happiness and ecstasy, versus homes that I go into where, father-in-law, 3 brothers-in-law, there's 10 people visiting, the TV's on, the news, and, mom hasn't slept all day. She ate 2 granola bars and, hasn't been drinking water. It's like the opposite. And then you can just feel kind of the stress and the sleep deprivation. And, that's what starts to fuel the postpartum experience that's more tragic and traumatic, and, that you're struggling in. So I always suggest, anything you can do to create that postpartum oxytocin bubble, like walking around without your shirt on so that you're skin to skin with the baby as much as possible, and turning the news off, not scrolling through social media, like keeping the real world out. Like, you must see this in birth, like, it's magic. Like, focus on the magic and the miracle that just happened, and just keep the real world out for as long as you can. And that's what's going to help you stay in that present moment and feeling and focusing on the joy of it, and not, every little news flash that comes through or judgy neighbor that says something, it like pierces that bubble of oxytocin, and it like leaks out and flies away. So
I love this vision of a baby moon, and I can just feel the yumminess as you're talking about it. And I can also feel how counterculture it is, right? So just like when I talk about ecstatic birth, that's very counterculture. Our culture is very much fixated on the pain and how do you manage the pain. And so in order to go counterculture, there are challenges, right? And I know, how to give my clients advice on how do you navigate that with the world around you. I'm wondering if you have similar advice for, somebody that holds this vision that you just described of a baby moon, but maybe doesn't have the mother-in-law that understands, or the friends or the neighbors. What advice would you give that mom that wants to create this? Because she is, for the most part, going counterculture.
Right. I love that, like going rogue. So the best thing to do is the earlier you start, the better. Like talking with your partner about how you want it to be, how you want it to feel, and then talking with family members early on. Like, listen, this is how we want the first few weeks to be. We don't want visitors. Or I also recommend, if you're trying to set up like a no visitor bubble, like say, okay, everybody come over Saturday from 2 to 4. Like the house is open. You can all come see the baby, and then you're all leaving. And P.S. bring a casserole. But, talking with family members and friends beforehand about how you want it to be, and kind of, I always say, like gearing yourself up for them. If they're upset, they're upset, but you can't live through your postpartum experience trying to please other people. Like, you've got to put you're a mom now. You have to put yourself first for the sake of your baby. And the payoff is just unbelievable, and how you heal faster from birth. You're happier because you're not missing naps. You're not getting into this huge sleep deprivation debt. And then I think keeping that honeymoon analogy alive in your planning really helps, because there's something about the honeymoon, like you don't feel guilty about getting a massage while you're on your honeymoon or splurging to go water skiing. So don't feel like you're weak because you're practicing, radical self-care while you're postpartum, or splurging on a postpartum doula or a cleaning service or a dog walker, things that are going to make your life easier. And that's just, I think, one of the biggest things you can do. Start early. And I think I always say it's the same with birth, like setting the ground rules of who's allowed in the room. And I always say, the baby is going to still be cute 3 weeks down the road, 1 month down the road. Like, no one is going to get so mad at you that they cut you off and never come. Like, they're going to come when you say they can come, and they'll get over it if they're upset.
Yeah, I think a big piece of what you just said is, you're a mom now, right? Mm-hmm. And I see that a lot of women, for the first time when they're pregnant, really prioritize their self-care above everything else, right? Like, there's a switch that happens. And I think for me and a lot of the women that I see, a lot of the women that I work with, a big part of becoming a mom is being able to really feel into what's right for you, what's right for your family, what's right for your body, and make that a priority over
mm-hmm.
all these other expectations. One of the things, Darcy, I have a lot of birth practitioners and really practitioners that support women throughout pregnancy and delivery and postpartum. And one of the things we talk about is when we're holding the vision for something as beautiful as, let's say, an ecstatic birth or a babymoon, and then we see the opposite over and over again, that can be so hard for us. That could be so heart-wrenching for us. And so how do we continue to hold that vision even if our clients aren't quite there themselves? Or, in the ecstatic birth practitioner training, which is actually starting soon. Yay, I'm so excited. We do a lot of work on ourselves. How do we support ourselves through pleasure so that we can show up and hold that vision for our clients in that way? And it occurs to me that, and I know we got a comment on one of the promotions we did for this live about what happens if you're supporting someone, whether that's formally or informally, that isn't holding this vision for herself, who isn't holding the sanctity of this period in a way that's really nourishing her and supporting her, but she's feeling frantic and frazzled, and here you are, you're trying to love her up, and it's just, she's just not helping herself. What do you do in that situation? Do you have some advice?
My first advice is it's so frustrating when that happens, and especially when you, as a practitioner, have a few clients in a row where that happens. But it's important to remember, this is not your story. This is not your birth. This is not your postpartum period. And you can only, this is this mom on her own path. But that being said, still, I think postpartum, this is such a common question I get, well, what can I do if, moms are struggling? And it's just, the answer is show up. As much as I just said, no visitors, but, a mom who needs it, who maybe worked with her as her birth doula, showing up, holding space, and just listening to what she's saying is huge, because, and remembering that birth, that transition that you've just gone through, is huge. And oftentimes, partners and grandmothers, they kind of just brush it off, okay, baby's here, baby's great, and let's move forward. So as you're supporting someone, stepping back and just listening, letting them talk about what they need to talk about. And another thing is, asking them what they need. I always say, as a postpartum doula, every day that I show up to a new mom's house, it's going to be different, even with the same mom. And I always start by listening to what she says and then saying, okay, so what do you need right in this moment? And, you know, sometimes it's more talking, sometimes maybe 90% of the time it's a nap. You know, it's amazing what happened. You know, a mom, you can show up, a mom will like just, you know, share all the stuff going on in her head. But it's amazing if you just hear it and say, you know, that's normal, that's fine. Let me hold the baby. And then they go take a nap and they come out and they're like, oh, okay, I can do this. It's not so bad. Like sleep is amazing. So, you know, really listening to what that mom says. Sometimes it's sleep. Sometimes it's, she needs a break. She needs to just go outside. Sometimes I'm like, go outside and just walk around your house 4 times. Like, don't go anywhere. Don't leave or pace the backyard so no one sees you. But just, you know, get that break or take a long shower or a bath, you know, figure out what it is that mom is truly asking for and then help her get it.
What I love about,
it's really simple.
What I love about what you shared is like you're really putting it back to her, right? So we have this tendency when we want to help people culturally, societally, like, let me tell you what to do. But actually what you just said was so brilliant because you listened to what she said and then said, well, what do you need? And turning it back to the mom and having her source from her own truth and her own inner wisdom. Mm-hmm. That way she can start to do that for herself. I love how you just highlighted that.
Yes. I mean, so many times moms are not really, they're never really, barely ever are they asking for advice. They're, you know, every once in a while they are, but really sometimes there's a lot to just vent out and talk about. And there's not really many safe spaces to share that, you know, people, you know, if you start to talk about like the fact that you're struggling, people like get uncomfortable and start to say, well, you're okay. It'll be okay. It'll get better. And, you know, everybody goes through this or whatever, you know, they push it off. But when you can take a step back and just listen. And it's so hard. And it's funny. Sometimes I will literally sit on my hands to like remind myself, like, don't, because you want to jump in and just help and take care of things. But sometimes the best thing you can do is just let them unload and don't freak out. Like, you know.
The other thing that you said, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The other thing that you said, I want to say before I forget, is that I think is so important. And you started with this earlier, is like, their path is not your path, right? So you're like holding the space, you're holding the vision, but to know that their path is theirs. And so, you know, like one of the things we talk about in the realm of ecstatic birth is this rhythm of expansion and contraction that happens in labor, but it happens in life as well. And sometimes women have like contractive moments when they're trying to get pregnant. Sometimes the contraction is the birth itself, like, oh my God, that experience was so intense for me. Or sometimes that contractive moment will come in the postpartum period, and that's their path. And a contraction is not necessarily a bad thing. It's the work you have to do to, you know, get to your next expansion. So I love that you said for the birth practitioners, when you're seeing someone that's like flailing like that or having a hard time, to be able to still hold the vision is really saying like, okay, so you're going through a contraction. I'm here to support you and reflect back to you. What do you need? And at the same time, for a birth practitioner to not get scared, to know that like this is their path and it's a normal part of a person's path to have like gnarly moments in their journey.
Right. And also, like you said, maybe this is the world's next ecstatic birth practitioner. Maybe this is the world's next birth doula. Like so many of us have come to this work from that place of contraction, from our experience. Like maybe, so it's okay when people have those kind of experience. Maybe maybe they're going to do something different the next time they have a baby, to change their experience. So it like I said, it's so hard to remember that, but it's really vital.
Yeah. And then to also like know that we can hold a vision for this ideal, right? We can hold the vision for this like beautiful oxytocin filled, like, you know, Babymoon period. And that, like, you know, I say this in ecstatic birth world too, that's an ideal. And like, ideals are meant to inspire us and not to judge ourselves by. So there are always moments that you're going to feel like, oh my God, like this is not what I want for me, not what I want for our family right now, but that's okay. Like we can still hold that vision for the ideal.
Yeah. And then also remembering, especially with postpartum moms, like the hormonal state that they're in, like that brain fog, that mommy brain fog, like even sometimes when a mom asks for advice and you give her some really solid nuggets of advice, she doesn't even hear it. And, and just remembering that that's okay too. Like sometimes, hormonally you're not set up to make big changes, if that's why I always talk about the planning part is so important because once you are postpartum, it's really hard to even figure out, like if you're having a breastfeeding problem, it's really hard to navigate, like, how do I find a lactation counselor? Like, or, things like that. So I think as practitioners, remembering that state that moms are in and that, as much as we do and say, sometimes, no matter what we do or say, like nothing's, going to change it because of the state that sleep deprived state that mom's in.
So any expectant moms that are watching should go to your site and check out your postpartum planning guide before they get into that state so they can set themselves up to have the best experience possible.
Yes. And I also have, to continue on that planning, I have a whole Third Trimester Thrive program. It's a free 10-day program where you'll get an email from me every day with a little action tip to set yourself up to thrive. While you're still pregnant, set yourself up for success postpartum.
What a lovely resource. Thank you so much for sharing. So we'll put the links up for that right here in this post in the comments section for anybody that's interested. Darcy, thank you so much for joining me today. I feel like I could talk to you forever and ever, but I want people to actually watch this video to have it be like a digestible size. Is there anything that maybe you didn't say that you want to make sure to say before we close?
First of all, thanks for having me. And like you said, I could keep talking for hours, but I think it comes down to mindset, and remembering, as your mind, once your baby's here, starts to spin off, just look at your baby and be like, I made that. Focus on the miracle, focus on the magic, and, take 5 deep breaths thinking about that and let the dishes pile up in the sink.
And I'm going to highlight what you said before, get naked.
Take your shirt off.
It's the best.
Oxytocin, skin to skin. Right. I always say it's never too late for skin to skin. Like skin to skin is healing and you can never have too much.
Darcy, thanks again for coming. Thank you everyone for watching, whether it's now or later. We are holding that vision for an ecstatic birth, for an ecstatic baby moon period, and lots of love, everyone. Bye.